Hello, welcome back to another episode of Inside the Data on Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher, and of course, we got some numbers to crunch. And when we do that, we bring in our data expert, Sam Finkel. And Sam, good morning to you. Hope everything's well. And I love the fact that we start the show off with you wearing a Penn State hat. Not only because I am a Penn Stater, but we may have some interesting Penn State news in this podcast. So, of course, what we're going to do in this pod is go through analytically the Eagles trade where they bring in John Metchie, wide receiver from the Houston Texans, obviously a standout Alabama receiver, as you recall. And then at the end, we'll also there's a double layer to this. Because of that, they trade Harrison Bryant, and it looks like there might be a new tight end 3 that we will discuss. But let's get back to Metchie. All right. I discovered something this week that I probably may have known in the past, but don't remember. Courtesy of Jahan Dotson, a Penn State receiver, who said that he was a host for Johnny Metchie, and Johnny Metchie himself said, I almost went to Penn State. Now, Sam, our listeners may forget, and I'm glad you're wearing the hat, that you were a coach at Penn State at one point, an assistant QB's coach, was it?
Yeah.
Right. But I know you were involved with recruiting, and you were there when Jahan Dotson was there. So do you recall the Penn State recruitment of Johnny Metchie?
So I don't recall that exactly. Okay. However, I have a friend who coached both Jahan Dotson and John Metchie at Petty in New Jersey.
Right. So, now, Petty, for those who don't know, is a very hoity-toity prep school right outside of Trenton in the town of Heightstown. I started off my career covering high school sports in New Jersey. I don't remember at the time Petty being known for football. They had a good basketball team, and there's a couple of schools in that greater Trenton area, like the Hun School and Princeton Prep and Pennington Prep. Some of them that do they take in guys from everywhere around the country. You know, they're like the New Jersey's IMG. But I don't remember Petty being a powerhouse back then, but I think it might be more of a recent thing in that regard.
Sure. I think my friend had a lot to do with that too. He's doing some training now, so he's doing some cool stuff.
Good. Well, I can only imagine what could have been if the Nittany Lions had both Johnny Metchie and Jahan Dotson for that last year of Trace McSorley, I want to say. Was it?
So at that point, it probably would have been the early years of Sean
Clifford.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Which were some pretty good years, but that would have been that would have been a nice little lineage too, because after Jahan Dotson, the wide receiver, we had Godwin, right? We had Dotson, we had Allen Robinson, even before Godwin, which for Penn State is amazing because, as you know, our history of pumping out NFL wide receivers was pretty bleak for about 20 years.
We had KJ Hamler.
Right. KJ Hamler.
So,
yep. I forgot about him. Yeah.
Keandre Lambert-Smith was there right after. Yep. There were a couple guys, but yeah, I get what you're saying. Metchie would have been a game changer for them.
Yeah. It feels like we're sort of going back the other way again. So hopefully the transfers Penn State brought in this year will be good. But enough of Penn State. We're going to talk Johnny Metchie. And what we do with you, Sam, as you always, is we look at these additions to the Eagles from an analytical standpoint. So we bring up charts. And for people who are listening on the pod at home and can't see it, we will do our best to make this visual as well. So Sam, thanks for compiling the data once again, as you always do. And let's take a start off. I enjoyed how you put these charts together with the old cancellation line, because this trade in a vacuum is going to look almost farcical, I think, compared to what people thought of it when it first happened in the offseason. But go ahead and go through how this trade is going to wind up unfolding.
Yeah, no doubt. So like you said, I mean, it did cancel out a big part of the first trade that the Eagles made with the Houston Texans earlier in the offseason, trading for Kenyon Green and trading away C.J. Gardner-Johnson. That trade included the Houston 5th-round pick and the Eagles 6th-round pick, which, again, was switched back in the second trade, where the Eagles acquired Metchie and gave up Harrison Bryant. So in a vacuum, the trade is Kenyon Green and John Metchie for C.J. Gardner-Johnson and Harrison Bryant.
Yeah. Interesting trade. I know C.J. Gardner-Johnson got hurt. I think he's healthier now, or healthy. I'm sure, if he's ready for the season, he'll be a good player. As long as C.J. Gardner-Johnson is ready for the season, and that's a really good defense the Texans have prepared, you can say on the surface that the Texans won this trade, but you also have to factor into the account that this was a salary dump trade. So I don't think Howie Roseman was expecting. He knew he was not getting an even return in terms of talent. Now Kenyon Green is interesting. He shouldn't make the team. He has not played well. He has been hurt. However, he was acquired in a trade, and it wouldn't shock me if somehow he got himself hurt again in the preseason finale and wound up on IR for a developmental year. We'll see. Or even if he's kept as a developmental player, if Jeff Stelton really bangs the table. But that's going to be tough for them to keep with what they need right now, depth-wise on the offensive line.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think some injury way, they're going to find a way to keep him ideally in the room. Do you see it possibly as like a practice squad, or do you think another team is going to jump in? Because I mean, what we've seen is not great.
I mean, it's tough because offensive linemen are generally around the league. There are some positions where if you waive a guy, you're not really worried about him being claimed off waivers. I do think guard is probably one of those positions you feel better about than as opposed to tackle.
Sure.
So maybe there's a shot that they can do that. I don't think they'll lose sleep if Kenyon Green does get claimed by somebody else, but I do think just knowing how Jeff Stelton thinks, that they would like some time to develop him, and they will think that him getting hurt wasn't exactly great for his development, although he has been back at practice, so that's good for him. And as in terms of Harrison Bryant, the Eagles, this is why the Eagles do a good job of stockpiling players at positions on one-year deals, because, the old expression, one man's junk or one person's junk is another person's treasure. The Texans needed a tight end because Brevin Jordan tore his ACL, much like the Raiders needed a tackle after their Christian Wilkins fiasco. So they were able to acquire Thomas Booker from the Eagles because they needed it. Well, Harrison Bryant wasn't going to make the Eagles, but he has probably a pretty good chance to make the Texans now. And of course, in bringing somebody back in John Metchie, Howie Roseman has some optionality here. There's not a lot of time though. It's really, by the time people listen to this podcast, it's basically a week before cut down date, right? So, yeah. And not practices every day. There's, one last camp practice. There's a walkthrough, a game on Friday, a day off Saturday, and then Sunday, Monday, Tuesday Tuesday is the cut down. So it's really Sunday, Monday, but we know that moves start being made Sunday and Monday. So not a lot of time. And I'm just curious. I'll get your thoughts on this. I'm really curious. There's two schools of thought. Some people think that Howie doesn't make this trade unless he plans to keep Metchie on the roster. My school of thought is I've seen Howie make plenty of trades in the last week of camp to have bodies to kick the tires, and those guys have not made the team. So what are your thoughts on Metchie?
I think more likely than not, he makes the team.
You think so?
I do. And I think it goes deeper than just having that kind of player. Mm-hmm. I think relationship-wise, his relationship with Devonta Smith, his relationship with Jahan Dotson, just as pure examples, I think that's a big fundamental part of what the Eagles have been trying to build and what has made them pretty successful as a unit, right? I mean, these relationships are deeper than just football. And I think that when you have those kind of relationships, you tend to have a lot more chemistry and thus on-field success. So yeah, I think his leash is going to be like a little bit longer than a guy that you would just trade for normally at this state. And I think that they're going to give him some time. I just I don't know if he's going to crack the starting spot. Like, I don't think there's an expectation he's going to step in wide receiver 3. He might have opportunities, but I think that's a guy you get in the room because he's a glue guy, because he has these relationships. And then if he produces really well on top of it, you're really happy about it.
Yes. Well, let me say this. I halfway agree with you. I think that there's a want to keep and see because of what he was at Alabama and what he could be if you continue to develop him and he gets his strength back. We know he had to beat cancer, leukemia. He had ACL in college. And then the Texans have been just drafting wide receivers over the last 2 years to the point. And then they hit on Tank Dell, right? Who we'll see if he's ever able to come back. But the point was with the Nico Collins development, the 2 kids they drafted this year, Metchie was continuing to be like lower and lower on the depth chart. And so maybe a new scenario is good and the Eagles will capitalize on that. But where I'll say I have a caveat on this is that we don't know what's up with Johnny Wilson. He got hurt at practice Tuesday. And if it's long-term, that gives them potentially a spot to put him on PUP and then have Metchie on the team. But if Wilson is healthy and they think he's going to be fine, Sam, I don't know how Johnny Metchie makes the 53 unless Howie Roseman makes another trade, which is always very possible. And oddly enough, that trade could be Jahan Dotson out the door because teams are looking for veteran wide receivers right now. Because as it stands right now, if Wilson's healthy, you've got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jahan Dotson, you got Johnny Wilson. Anaya Smith, I think, has done a lot to make this team. He's a punt returner too. That's 5. And guess what? Darius Cooper is not a training camp darling in our normal. He's a guy who looks like the real deal, and you want to keep and develop and be afraid to lose. So that's 6 right there.
And do you keep 7? I think that's a crazy statement to say to keep 7. But
I think it'd be pretty crazy. But I've seen the Eagles do some crazy things before roster wise, and then once the initial 53 is over, they start playing roster tango or they make a trade after that. So I agree with you in your premise that the Howie Roseman would like to keep him, but it will not be as easy as just John Metchie makes the 53. There's going to have to be some moving parts to make that happen.
Sure. And again, the expectations, they're important, right? So I think people see this trade and some people are disappointed in the way Jahan Dotson produced last year. I think it's important to understand that he's not coming in for that 3 spot right now. Like that may happen, who knows? Right. But I think it's important, and the charts will show that that was not even a thought process right now.
So. Right. Let's go to your first chart because I think that these are just, as we always do, just let's point out the facts, the career stats. This is stuff that's most of it is what people can find on like Pro Football Reference. However, I think the last 2 columns of this box are really, really important to telling the story of Johnny Metchie and why he might fit well with the Philadelphia Eagles. So go ahead and present what we have on the box here.
Yeah, sure. So again, this is just his career statistics from 23 and 24, because those are the years he played. He had 19 receptions on 33 targets in 23, 30 receptions for 40 on 46 targets in 24. He got 202 and 317 yards respectively. He is averaging around 10.59 yards per reception, and it's pretty consistent near that both years. He has 1 career touchdown in the regular and postseason, and he has, I believe, another one in the preseason. And then what you said, the last 2 columns is the slot percentage and when he played outside. So it's pretty interesting. He fits pretty well in the slot. He did a little bit less of the slot in 23, but a lot more in 24. And he's around 50-50, 51% and on average, and 48.89% outside on average.
Right. So Johnny Metchie, what this chart really brings to life with context is Johnny Metchie is a versatile receiver who can play the Z and the X. He's not a big guy. I'm sorry, the Z and the slot. He's not an X.
Yeah.
He's not Nico Collins, right? So he's a big guy. I'm sorry, he is not a big guy. He's got a taller frame, but he's not your natural physically strong AJ Brown like receiver who's going to fight off press coverage. This is a guy that you want to give some releases to. You don't want to play in the slot at times. You can play him in the Z. When he was coming out of college, I had a lot of personnel folks told me he, in certain offenses, could be a really good slot wide receiver. And as you're noting here, in 2024, last year, he played more in the slot, 60% in the slot. Why is that? Well, the Texans had a pretty good slot/Z in Steph Diggs, and Steph Diggs tore his ACL, and that opened up the door. And also Tank Dell got hurt. Dell's another guy who can move around, and it opened up the door for Metchie to play more snaps in that position. When you look at where Metchie would play for the Eagles, Sam, I know this for a fact that they would rather play Devontae Smith at the Z more and move him than playing him in the slot as much as they did last year because of his knees. They want, and his body frame. They want to keep him out of all that high traffic area, and they want to be able to use his full route tree. That's why I think Anaya Smith, who is a natural slot, has a good chance to make the team and play well. But let's be honest, if Johnny Metchie is what he was coming out of Alabama and you're developing him correctly, he's probably better than Anaya Smith. And then here you have an opportunity to put him on the field in a more natural position for him where he could play in the slot.
Absolutely. 100% agree with you.
Now, that would probably take a little time and a little, fact finding as to who Johnny Metchie is at this stage of his career. And that's where we're going to break down your next chart where we really get into the advanced data. Go ahead and present what we're looking at.
Yeah. So again, this is kind of what I was referring to earlier, right? With this, there's this black line under Jahan Dotson because
Right.
I feel like I can confidently say that those are who are anticipated to get the starting looks.
Yep.
Whether that changes throughout the season, who knows? But I think it's kind of a little fun to go into. I actually have some of the data. If you remember, throughout the offseason, we did a series on production and athleticism scores.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually have some of the production athleticism scores for some of these guys that I just think add some interesting context.
Love that.
And I also have their height weight from when they came out. So Metchie, second round pick, came out at 5'11", 187 with an 80 production score and 66 athleticism.
Right. That I meant to say that is another thing that the college, the personnel folks of the NFL will tell me, good receiver, not necessarily going to blow you away with his athleticism, which almost makes him a little bit anti-Eagle, right? Because
very much so.
But highly productive is something that the Eagles like too.
But Dotson, similarly, it's very interesting to see how similar they are, right? Dotson was a first round pick, 5'11", 178. And again, Metchie, 5'11", 187. And now these weights have since changed since they've come into the league, but this is just them coming out. But their production and athleticism scores also very similar. Metchie had 80 and Dotson was 84. And athleticism 66 for Metchie and 67 for Dotson. So they profile somewhat pretty similarly, which is interesting.
That's true. It's amazing to me because Dotson, I think if you watch his tape, you know how they say your tape speed is different than your play speed and your testing. Like if you watch Dotson play at Penn State, you would have thought he was one of the best athletes at the position because of his ability to use his body leverage and contested catches for a guy who's only 5'11". You know this more than anyone. I mean, he was constantly going up and getting the ball over defenders, making tough catches, cutting and reversing after a catch. I mean, you would have thought he had great athleticism. He just was deceptively quick and athletic.
Yeah, I think it was we had packages specifically for Jahan Dotson because of how much we believed in him.
That's amazing.
The thing is, like, I remember Jared Parker, who was the receiver coach at the time, he described him like a gazelle. He's like that man just moves so fluidly in open field. And honestly, I couldn't get that. Honestly, with his Southern accent, it's so hard to get that out of my head, him saying that. And so every time I hear his name, I keep thinking about that man moves like a gazelle. So honestly, I totally get what you're saying.
That's crazy. Well, I'll save this point for after we finish up this box, but go ahead.
Yeah. I do have the production athleticism score for the other guys. That I'll go very quickly. Obviously, Wilson, very different size, 6'6", 231, 6th round pick, 65 production, 84 athleticism. So kind of more what the Eagles look for in this.
Well, now the 84, I'm going to use your own sort of what's the word? I'm looking context for it. Your athleticism score includes your height and weight,
it does.
correct?
It absolutely.
So it's not like this guy at 6'6" was running like a 4.240 or anything like that. It's just that's part of your athleticism score. So that skews it heavily. But go ahead.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and thank you for bringing that up. Marshall, 2nd round pick, 6'2.5", 205, 77 production, 81 athleticism. He was supposed to be pretty special coming out.
Yeah.
And it just hasn't worked out, unfortunately, for whatever reasons, injuries, just not great situation. It's been tough. And then finally, Aniyah Smith, 5th round pick, 5'9", 190, 66 production, 60 athleticism. And to your point before, what hurts his athleticism is his height, right? So we have to acknowledge that part of it.
Although when you said a 66, I mean, that makes, even if he was 6 foot and, a little stronger, probably is not going to be in the mid to upper 80s either. That would be a quantum leap just on a couple of inches and pounds, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
But it does bring him down. So I think it's worth noting for sure.
This has to be the most diverse set of backup wide receivers you'll ever see. A 6'6" guy, a 5'9" guy, a beautiful athlete in Terrace Marshall, who's like completely unproductive in his career, and John Metchie, a guy who was drafted 44th overall, beat cancer, right? Like precision route runner, probably compared to all those other three. Just unreal. It's just a funny and interesting collection of receivers there.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's pretty accurate. So if we look at this chart, I included. So this is a pretty descriptive title, and it's a little different than I normally do it. But there was just so much I feel like is worth mentioning, right? So it's the Eagles 2025 non-rookie wide receivers, because obviously the rookie wide receivers aren't going to have stats from last year. Advanced statistics for the 2024 regular and postseason. So getting that out of the way, I wanted to look at routes, right? Because I think it's important to understand where these stats come from. And in a vacuum, like you can't compare somebody who does 428 routes to someone who does 42, right? It's just not a fair comparison.
Perfectly understood. Yep.
So just understanding, you have the starters above, and then you have it in, an order of most to least routes ran. So Metchie to Anaya Smith. Anaya Smith only had 42. Metchie had 281. So it's going to be a little hard because of sample size reasons to compare these guys. But we're going to do it anyway, and just understanding that caveat going in.
Okay. So yeah, like what jumps out to me is that Anaya Smith last year's target percentage was 21.4, which would be the highest among the reserves and would be only below Devontae and AJ Brown. But the context is that his 42 routes were mostly ran in that one start that he had at the end of the year, where he was the number 1 or 1A receiver. Tanner McKee was throwing the ball. He caught a touchdown. That does not mean his 21% target percentage is somehow way better than Johnny Metchie's 16.7. It's just the context of that discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to understand that like target percentage isn't your total target share from the team. It's how often you're targeted on those routes you ran, right? And I think that's an important distinction, because you look at these numbers and you think like they have to add up to 100 on whatever team you're on, and they don't, because it's relative to the routes you ran.
There you go. I think the one that jumps out you have properly shaded is the red 7% target share for Terrence Marshall. I mean, 84 routes is not a lot, but he clearly, even on those routes that he was running, and I have to think when he was in the game, they were either, he was on a couple teams last year. They were either down big or just there for an injury, but the ball didn't come his way. So
yeah, it really didn't. And I think it's important. It kind of shows like, do you make the most of your opportunities, or were you given an it's kind of unfair for receiver, because obviously it's dependent on whether you get thrown the ball, but you also have to get open to get the ball. So and the quarterback has to be capable of doing it. So there's a lot. It's a multifaceted analysis. It's hard to just pin based on that number, but that number gives kind of an idea.
Okay. Cool. So we got now. Let's go to. I think catch percentage is a good one, because that's just the percent number of times that you caught the ball when it came your way.
Sure.
Again, there will be context if you're playing with a bad quarterback and he sails it over your head. It might, be part of your catch percentage. I would assume if it's catchable but not really a great ball, that hurts you.
Yeah, and the thing is, that's where I think the advanced stat of catch rate over expectation is a pretty good stat, because it adjusts for that in the expected catch. And in this analysis in particular, and I've done it a couple times, I wanted to show what that expected catch percentage is before because I could have easily just done catch rate over expectation, but I think it's important to see like where these numbers come from, right? So again, that catch rate over expectation is just the catch percentage you see there subtracted by the expected. And that net result is your catch rate over expected.
So for those who can't watch on YouTube or are listening, the big red flags are Johnny Wilson's rookie year, where he only caught 31% of his passes. He was expected to catch 54%. So he has the highest negative rate there at almost 23%. That checks out. I mean, you saw they used him mostly last year as a blocking receiver anyway. When they did throw him the ball, sometimes it was like Jalen Hurts under duress and just trying to, fling the ball his way. He was not like a main target. And then the same thing for Anaya Smith, who had a really nice game playing with Tanner McKee in a meaningless game against the Giants. So as in terms of Johnny Metchie here, though, I think it's pretty good. Like when you look at Metchie and Dotson, right? We're comparing them. Metchie and Dotson are in similar situations where they weren't the number one, they weren't the number two. The ball didn't come their way a lot, but when it did, they were similar, although Metchie a little bit better as far as his expected catch rate and catch rate over expectation.
Yeah, and it's a very marginal difference, right? It's 0% versus 0.1%. So again, like you what that tells you is you kind of get what an average receiver would catch there. Like you're just they're gonna make the catches that they can. They're not gonna do that much more. At least that's what they haven't shown so far last year.
Mm-hmm.
So
all right. Anything else jumping out at you? I mean, we could talk about how awesome Devontae Smith is.
yeah. Yeah, I think listen, I will always take an opportunity to highlight Devontae Smith because I think for how great he is, he's still underrated and underappreciated.
I would agree. So
So
the numbers here say that his catch percentage was at 79% and his expected catch percentage was at 67%. So he's up around 12% of catch rate over expectation, which is the highest among all the receivers on this chart, including Anaya Smith. But more importantly, among the top three of Brown, Smith, and Dotson. And not that Brown. Yeah, Brown's pretty good too. He's 9% over. Yeah.
So these guys can make difficult catches and consistently have made difficult catches, and that's kind of like a hallmark of those two guys. And then if you look, everybody else is like, you just hopefully get what you can get out of them, and that's okay. I mean, listen, if you have two elite guys that can make amazing catches, you feel pretty good about your offense.
Definitely. All right, before we get into the EPA, I want you to again. I think I'm going to have you do this almost every single show. We have a lot of new listeners, and I think data and analytics can be hard to understand sometimes if you don't know the lingo. Remind everyone what EPA means and is, and what it quantifies.
Yeah, it's just expected points added, and it's an algorithm that takes basically what you do and based on your plays and how likely does that make it to score points, right? So there's assigned values for every like play. So like a 20-yard catch on your side of the field versus like a touchdown catch, they have different values associated with them, and it's really just it's a value trying to project the likelihood that your play in particular led to points scored. That's kind of the idea of it. It's an imperfect value, but there really isn't a perfect one. It's a really good indication of are you contributing to meaningful scoring plays on a consistent basis? That's kind of the idea behind it.
So let me ask you this. If the offense starts with the ball at its own 20-yard line and the quarterback throws a 5-yard pass to a receiver, all right, that play can't lead to points because it's just a 5-yard pass all the way, but it leads to a drive potentially being extended. Is that part of the algorithm? Just
It
a
is.
5-year? Okay.
Yes.
I would love to know. I would really love to pick the brain of the person who came up with EPA, or the people, whatever, who came up with EPA and how they went about valuing that, because that's pretty fascinating to me.
It is fascinating, and it's a really cool study, and it's cool that somebody came up with that. And again, it's imperfect because, just because you're getting opportunities that'll lead to score doesn't mean that the team scores, right? So that's another part of it. And also, are these values arbitrary? Like, you're right, where do they actually come from, right? Every type of play has a like value associated with it. And when you do that, again, teams are different. So it's imperfect, but it's the best we got.
All right. Last question. And you may not know the answer to this.
Sure.
I don't know if you know the people who came up with EPA. Let's say, do you have to wait until the drive is over for each play to be measured? Because, all right, let's say you get that 5-yard pass. Okay. That helps you move the ball 5 yards down the field. When you started at your own 20, you're now at the 25. So I get how numerically, so you're now only 75 yards. So there's a quantifiable point. But if your quarterback throws an interception on the next play, the drive is dead. You scored no points. But that doesn't mean that 5-yard catch was not important. So I guess, is every single play weighted immediately, or does the result of the drive itself influence the quantification of each play?
From my understanding, it's predetermined as soon as it happens. Every
as it should be.
Yeah, every type of play has an associated value. So as soon as it happens, you can kind of already tell where that is.
So then I get it, because you're really working on a numerical system of 1 to 100, right? The yards on a field and how each play and the net yards sort of gets you closer to that 100. or to the end zone and what its value is. I can see, I'm not a math person, but I can almost see now how on a field of 100 yards, it's easier to measure or quantify each individual play.
Yeah, and one more thing on that, what's interesting is like a 1-yard touchdown versus a 90-yard touchdown actually have different EPAs, even though they both lead to the same amount of points.
That's fascinating now.
They're trying to value like your
efficiency, right?
Yeah, I mean it's again,
you
it's
covered more ground on one play, right?
Right.
So, man, I love it. That's
Well,
good
because
stuff.
I mean, listen, if you're hitting 90-yard plays, like you're leading to more points. Like that's the thought process. Again, it's somewhat flawed.
Yeah.
But how else do you capture, big plays? Like you can't just say everything is worth 6. So it's a very weird system.
Right. I'm definitely going down an EPA rabbit hole after this pod and trying to figure out how it's all numerically put together.
Sure.
Where do you get your EPA stats from, by the way?
Yeah. So these ones were for NFL Pro.
Okay, great.
So I'm trying to use NFL Pro a lot more. And I use PFF too. But the problem is I think we've mentioned it in a different podcast. They're not always lined up. So I got to be very careful. And you're right. I think I should say that at the beginning. These statistics are from NFL Pro. I like NFL Pro's advanced stats. I think they're the best advanced stats out there right now. NFL Next Gen stats I swear by them. But again, there is subjectivity in some of the things, not so much in receiver, right? There was some subjectivity in the last video that we talked about with Jacorian Bennett because they assigned him as like giving up 2 touchdowns in NFL Pro. And then I watched those touchdowns and they weren't his fault. So
got it. Yes, you always say the subjectivity is involved in there, and I'm glad you do that extra legwork.
Absolutely.
So let's go back to now receiving EPA and EPA per target, which is again expected points average.
Added.
Sorry, added. Yeah. Right. What jumps out at you?
All right. So here's where it gets a little bit weird, right? Everybody under that line has a negative receiving EPA and EPA per target. And I think EPA per target is probably a better stat to look at because receiving EPA is the total. And then the EPA per target is when you divide that receiving EPA by the amount of targets that they have. And so I think it's a better, because it's a relative stat. So it's probably a better one to look at.
Right. By the way, just to interrupt you, I'm sorry. When you said below the line, just for people listening, he means the Metchies, Johnny Wilson, Terrace Marshall, and Anais Smith.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. That's a good point.
No problem.
So basically what that's saying is every time you target that player, how many points are you expected to give to it? Like how many does that? And basically what you see is everybody above that line, which again, Brown, Smith, and Dotson, and Devonta Smith again, because now it's going to get confusing because Anais Smith. But all those guys, when you target them, you're creating expected points, right? So Brown was at 0.57. Devonta Smith was at the highest at 0.64. And Dotson even was like positive contributing to the drives at 0.05.
Right.
Now,
yeah. Go ahead.
No, please.
No, I want to let you finish. Then I'll make an overall point.
Sounds good. Now, when you look at the rest of the guys, they're all negative numbers, right? And what that means is that it's not really efficient on drives when you target these guys on average, at least last year. And again, sample size is important, but they're all at negative numbers. Metchie was at the best at negative 0.12, and Anais Smith was at the worst at negative 0.2. But again, 42 routes. So,
right, heavily weighted there. I think what this really shows is more of a bigger picture of how top heavy the receiving offenses for the Eagles and Texans for Metchie's purpose. Because as the chart shows, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith have good EPA per target, right? Half a point, 0.57, 0.64. And then as soon as you get to Dotson, 0.05, which is a pretty steep drop off. And then, of course, Metchie at minus in the minus numbers, he's a slot /Z on a sporadically used. I think he only played 45% of the snaps last year on offense. Might have been lower than that on a team where the ball was clearly going to other guys. So,
yeah,
but at the same time, not to like diminish it. These are also after Brown and Smith, whether it's Dotson, Metchie, Wilson, Marshall, Smith. These are also guys who have not been game changers and probably won't be in the NFL. To be honest with you, they're not game changer receivers.
No, and I agree, and I think that's a good point. I will say it's also per target and not per catch, and I think that's an important point
Good point.
because it's saying that they either weren't making these catches and therefore they were hurting drives, or the catches that they did make weren't significant enough to continue the drive. So I think that it's a little bit more nuanced than I think the way I initially presented it. Right? It's when they're targeted, not necessarily when they make their catches. And when we talked about it, right, Metchie averaged 10.59 yards per reception. So every time he was getting a reception on average, it was more than, the line to gain. But again, his catch percentage, 63.8%. So, I mean, he's doing a good job, but not all his targets are leading to sustained drives and therefore points, or expected points, rather.
Very perfect. Perfectly said. Next column would be average separation.
Yes. And if we remember, average separation is just the average separation between the receiver and the defender at pass arrival. So, and I think that's an important distinction because it's not talking about just their get off, right? It's talking about when the ball gets to them, how many yards between them and the nearest defender on average are there.
Right.
And I think it's really important to look at the 2-star receivers for the Eagles because A.J. Brown has a pretty low number. It's 2.1. I mean, the nature of his use, he does get a lot of tight window and contested, looks. But Devonta Smith, on the other hand, is very capable of those looks and that play style as well. But he has 3.2, a whole yard more in separation at pass arrival. And Dotson actually has the best. At 3.3, which is a little bit surprising, right? I mean, a lot of the times it looks difficult, but when he was getting the ball, he was wide open. That's what it's saying. It basically, when he got the ball, he was wide open. That's what I take from that.
Yeah, and then again, the context of, well, where are you lined up? Are you facing the number one corner like A.J. Brown, or are you facing a slot corner or a backup corner like Jahan Dotson comes into play? So it doesn't surprise. And then, of course, I think, it's interesting that Jahan Dotson ran more routes than A.J. Brown last year. That just jumped at me. And so did Devonta. I know A.J. missed a couple of weeks, but, the Eagles played so much 12 personnel that there were times where Dotson wasn't on the field for long stretches. It surprises me that he actually ran more total routes than A.J. Brown.
It's a little bit surprising. I'm a little surprised by it too. But yeah, I mean, if we talk about the other guys, I mean, Johnny Wilson, again, by virtue of his build, I mean, he's going to have contested opportunities. That's how they're going to use him. So
he is not a natural separator. Yeah.
And I'm not worried about that 1.9 number. I think it could get better for sure.
I think everything on his, under him from expected catch to catch over expectation can improve because if he's healthy and playing in camp, we've seen him targeted more, catch more, used differently, not just as a guy out there blocking and then the ball gets flung toward him when there's an all-out blitz. So yeah, I think that everything about it can improve theoretically.
Sure. And yeah, so I think, and the rest of the numbers are all around 3,
right?
Which is pretty normal, to be honest with you.
Right. So that's good. It's good. There's no underlying data here in average separation that would make you less encouraged by Johnny Wilson, nor overly encouraged by, Johnny Metchie or any of the other guys.
Sure.
And then the last column is I always forget. Is that total win rate?
It's tight window.
That's right. Tight window. Yeah.
And I didn't put like who was the best here because I think it's all relative. I just thought it was interesting to kind of see where Metchie fits in among the other guys, right? 17% tight window. And again, tight window is the percentage of targets where when the separation between the receiver and the nearest defender is less than 1 yard at pass arrival.
So just like we discussed with Johnny Wilson, a guy who doesn't create a lot of natural separation is going to have a higher tight window throw percentage because he's not separating. The defense is going to be close. So that's why his is at 50%. Yeah, it's tough to know what to make of this as far as I love that you didn't red or green it because it's just a stat. It's not necessarily positive or negative.
Right. It's all relative and it depends on your build, how you're used. Like if you're a red zone receiver is going to have more tight window. Like if you're going to use a guy more in the red zone, like I expect they will with Wilson. So I just thought it'd be interesting to throw it. There's nothing really more to take away than just the number and relative to the other guys. So
All right, great. Let's move on to Kylan Granson here as we talk about the second part of this trade. And so with Harrison Bryant now not part of it, excuse me, you have Dallas Goedert and Grant Calcaterra. That's your 1 and 2. I'm not sure there's going to be a number 3 tight end on the 53 initially. Kylan Granson is playing on some special teams, which is usually an indicator that guy has a shot. He was doing more special teams than Bryant. So obviously we'll see. But EJ Jenkins also plays special teams and is a far better blocker. So, and there's a chance both of these guys can be, parted ways with and brought back on the practice squad. But for all intents and purposes, Kylan Granson will get a little bit more of a look. And now that Harrison Bryant is gone.
And I mean, it gets more complicated, especially if they keep 7 receivers, which again, a little unheard of, but you have to cut somewhere, and it probably would be on the offense.
Yeah, I would agree. So, I don't know. I guess what jumps out a little bit about Granson as you put his career stats up here is 11.1 yards per catch is pretty good for a tight end. I mean, it shows he's got some field stretching ability.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably the main thing I would say too. I mean, he hasn't really had too many opportunities. I mean, he had a 31 and a 30 receiving season in 22 and 23, but only 368 yards at most and 106 at least. So, I mean, look, you're not expecting him to come in and be the next tight end 1 for the Eagles, right? Like that's not what you're expecting. But if he can replicate, that 11.1 yards per reception, I mean, that's a pretty solid for a third tight end option. You'd feel pretty comfortable with that.
That's also a little bit skewed by the first 2 years. I mean, if you look at his last 2 years when he's had far more, he's had, I don't want to say far more targets or receptions, but basically his last 2 years, he's averaged about, I would say 13.5 per catch as opposed to 11.1 for his career, which just goes to, again, show he can stretch the field. But as you show here, Grant Calcaterra has averaged 12.1 yards per catch, which is identical to Goddard's 12.1, and we all know how good Goddard is. So when I look at this, I think, what is Kylan Granson giving you as a number 3 tight end that you don't already have out of your top 2? Ordinarily, you're looking for someone who brings a little something different, can help you on special teams, can block a little bit, because we know that Goddard doesn't. We know that Calcaterra doesn't. So that's why I almost think EJ Jenkins may have a better shot. He's a 250-pound, 260-pound converted wide receiver / tight end who's worked on his blocking. But again, to your point, right? Like, do you have to keep him on the 53? You can probably bring him on the practice squad, elevate him if you need, and then wait till some injuries happen and then bring him up if you want that third tight end.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, if you scroll down a little bit on the chart, we can kind of see what Granson has done in the preseason, right?
Yep.
I mean, only had 4 target opportunities, but caught 3 of them for 28 yards, 9.33 yards per reception, which is a little bit lower than what he's been before. But again, the sample size is 4 targets, 3 catches, so it's hard.
Yeah, playing on that, hideous third string or second and third string offense against the Browns wasn't helping either.
For sure. So
yeah,
that's what we got.
All right, the QBR is good though, 93.8 on passes attempted toward him. So good stuff.
Again, the sample size kind of sucks. So it's like, what are you going to do at that point?
100%. I understand it. Hey, that was good. That was a nice little look at John Metchie, a little bit of Kylan Granson, a little walk down memory lane for your Penn State coaching career. And as we say from here, it just all depends how the rest is going to shake out. But I think from an analytics standpoint, some pretty encouraging signs that John Metchie can come in here. And if there is some movement at wide receiver, if Jahan Dotson winds up moving, or if somebody doesn't make the team, Johnny Wilson, then they can develop Metchie to serve as a similar role that Dotson at least served last year, which is that when you're needed and called upon, you can go in there and make a play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure this is not the last time we talk about those 2 guys. So
I would agree. All right. That's great. Great job, Sam. Again, thank you for all your help and all your great data analysis. That's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Data. For Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. We'll catch you all on the next one.